You are listening to the Enormocast.
The Enormocast is proud to be sponsored by Black Diamond Equipment.
At Black Diamond, the process of building gear begins and ends with climbing. A need drives an idea, and that idea is tweaked, tested, and refined in a never-ending cycle. Use, design, engineer, build, repeat. Guided by this philosophy, Black Diamond has been making equipment for the full spectrum of climbing pursuits for more than 25 years. From the boulders to the big walls and everything in between, Black Diamond makes gear and apparel you can trust when it matters.
Visit blackdiamondequipment.com to check out the latest all-new gear, as well as a fine-tuned collection of apparel, and get the latest stories, photos, and videos on their blog, Black Diamond Experience. Look, folks, we all know that ice climbing is a miserable, cold endeavor, punctuated by small spikes of joy, mostly when it's over. But if you're planning on heading to the famous ice park in Ouray, Colorado, to climb out your self-loathing, why not up the joy ratio by staying in the Wiesbaden Hotel and Spa? Imagine, after your third round of screaming barfies, you can retire to their vapor cave and soaking pool for a, quote, strange, dark, steamy underworld soaking experience. The Wiesbaden is affordable luxury in Ouray. In fact, if you climb in Ouray and don't stay there, you are totally blowing it. Discounts all winter. Go to wiesbadenhotsprings.com for more information. Once again, that's wiesbadenhotsprings.com. It's really the only way you'll find me ice climbing.
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
the
big place, that side of town. That's a big place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats. We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is January 3rd, 2016, about 9:30 Mountain Standard Time. It's a new year. We made it past the dark time. The solstice is behind us. Each day is getting longer here in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. Can't help you folks in the Southern Hemisphere. It's summertime there, so you have nothing to complain about. On today's show, Episode 96, a conversation with Swedish climber, sort of. This guy's actually kind of the world music of climbing, but he doesn't suck. Saeed Belhaj. From Sweden, half Moroccan, half Finnish, but we'll get to that. It's January. It's dead cold here in Colorado. I am going to the Ice Fest again this year. Ice Fest is a little bit later, in 2 weeks, I think like the 14th or something like that. Headed down there. I don't have anything planned for the Enormocast, actually. It's really hard to get interviews during those hectic festivals, and frankly, I just want to go have some fun, like we did last year. Same guys saddling up, Simon and Steve, from the last few Lander festivals, as well as Ouray last year, and also the last listener mail, actually, episode 73 or so, quite a while ago. Maybe time for another listener mail. I forget how much fun those things are. Got to get one in here. Anyway, headed down there with those guys, the posse. Going to drink a lot. Going to stay at the Wiesbaden, which is really about 90% of the reason I go to the Ice Fest, is to soak in their pools inside the cave. If you guys have not been there and you go to Ouray, as I said in the commercial, you are blowing it. The place is awesome. It's actually really affordable, especially if you pack a few people in the room. quietly pack them in. But man, it is so nice to walk off the snow, off the ice, and dip into those pools before you go out drinking, and then come home and do it afterwards. Good times at the Wiesbaden. Check it out. Oh, by the way, that's spelled with a W. Just so you know, Wiesbaden, German style W's. Go back and listen to Stefan. You'll hear some good German W's out of that guy. What else is happening here at the Enormocast? Headed to the Winter Trade Show, the little brother of the trade shows, next week. Going to get a few interviews there. I'm going to try not to hammer it so hard as I did last time, but as I've said before, it's a nice place to cross paths with people that I would not normally be able to talk to. So, got a few things lined up there. Hopefully they'll go well, and I'll just rolling into the new year. Trying not to get weak here in the wintertime. Building things. That's what I'm doing. I'm building things in my house. Got to keep that mind occupied. Okay, Saeed Belhaj. My friend Alan Karn introduced us and let me know that Saeed was coming to America, as it were, and introduced us on Facebook and found out that he was going to be right here in Rifle. So I connived my way to sit down with Saeed. As I've said on the show many times, I'm sort of like a hunter looking for these people when they cross paths because of my face-to-face rule. It can be a little bit difficult. More like a stalker, really. And actually, it's kind of funny because up at OR, a lot of times I have to ask these strangers to come to my cheap hotel room. That's how I work it. I have them get in my car, drive to my hotel room. Maybe first time we ever met. I think that's the way it went down with sweet Paige Clausen. Very trusting, but now we're friends, so it's okay. Anyhow, back to Saeed. I was super excited to talk to this guy. And though he grew up really as a sport climber and sort of came of age in climbing right as that was taking off, it's kind of interesting because it occurred to me that there is actually now such thing as sort of an old school sport climber. Somebody that started right at the beginning, was still letting a lot of that kind of philosophy, that sort of spiritual pursuit thing kind of cross over from the old trad days and into sport climbing. They weren't too different, really, in the beginning. Same kind of folks were switching over to sport climbing. Yeah, so he brings a lot of that kind of attitude to his climbing, this spiritual connection, this mystical connection. A lot of times it defies words, even though Saeed does his best to try to explain it. In addition, we talk a bunch about music, about a really interesting type of music that Saeed is into from North Africa. Pretty wide-ranging conversation. And I'll tell you, sitting across the coffee table from this guy up in Andrew Bisharat's office, he's an impressive guy. He's captivating, this guy. And he's also full of positive energy. I ended up climbing around him and seeing him rifle over the next few days through some really gnarly weather. And him and his partner were still just going for it and having a great time. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you become a fan of this guy, Saeed Belhaj. He is all in.
Because English isn't really, it's,
Sure.
I haven't spoken English for 2 days now. So it's good for us just to meet now and talk a little bit. It's good. And sometimes I can't find the word in my vocabulary, and then I can get stuck. But usually, if it's a relaxed atmosphere like this, no problem.
So I don't even know how to pronounce your last name, actually.
You want the authentic version or just the?
I want to hear the authentic version, and then what I say won't really probably get there.
So it's in Arabic. It's Saeed Belhaj.
Okay.
But you can just say Saeed Belhaj, I suppose.
That sounds a little more French, actually.
Peut-être, hein?
Okay, go the first one.
Saeed Belhaj.
Saeed Belhaj.
Yeah. Wow.
Not bad.
Good first shot.
Thanks a lot. So I'm sitting here with Saeed Belhaj. Thanks. You rolled your eyes a little bit that time. But we're sitting actually up in Andrew Bisharat's office. He was nice enough to lend us this space. And Saeed's here from Sweden. And thanks for coming and sitting down on the Enormocast, man.
Oh, thanks to you.
It's really exciting. I've read about you for years. Andrew specifically recently, I don't know, last couple of years, you had a profile in Rock and Ice, and but your name is like, it's just kind of been there for a long time in climbing, if particularly if one pays attention to European climbing, and so it's pretty exciting to sit down with you. You're sort of a kind of a mythical figure to me. That sounds kind of strange.
Wow.
Yeah, okay, so there's some pressure for you. So
okay, yeah.
Do something mythical,
yeah,
if you
let's
would.
take it from there.
Actually, what I wanted to start with, if we want to just roll in, is maybe go from big to small. And what I mean by that is, I actually kind of want to ask you about Sweden. That's where you are from, even though you have this really complicated heritage that's really interesting, and I want to get to that too. But let's go big, like the big thing, because I've heard from a few fans in Sweden. I've met a few Swedish climbers over the years, but it's a little bit of a mystery, like what the climbing scene is like in a place like Sweden. So let's go big, and then we'll go into how you fit into it and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, in Sweden and in Scandinavia in general, we have a quite old climbing tradition because we have a lot of rock there. And especially in Norway, Sweden is not bad, Finland is quite flat, and Denmark is completely flat. There is nothing there apart from climbing gyms. So we have a lot of climbing, but for some reason, and I hear this question very often because people always ask me, hey, do you have any climbing in Sweden? I said, of course, that's where I started. That's what I climb a lot of time because that's where I live, And for some reason, it hasn't really caught the eye of the international climbing media. And I mean, there are a lot of places like this, little hidden jewels, because it really is a jewel. Like our mutual friend Alan Carn was there like a couple of months ago, visited us, and he said like, this is as good as any trad cragging anywhere in the world,
And you're talking. You guys were climbing granite, right?
Yes, it's mostly all granite, and there's a lot of trad climbing. There's a lot of good sport climbing. There's a lot of bouldering, and I think for someone who would be a visitor would find that very exotic because it's Scandinavia. Right. It's so unlike anything else. Even for another European, if you would come from Germany, that's why Germans love Sweden, for instance. Or for someone even coming from France or Spain, it's like, wow, it's a different planet. Right,
because there's not a lot of granite on the mainland of Europe in terms, maybe in the Alpine, but it's known mostly for its limestone.
Yeah, it is very different, and it's very pittoresque. We always climb by the ocean, and there's a lot of granite and forests, and it's a nice place altogether. But if you want to climb some big stuff, I'd recommend Norway. But Sweden is a really good place on the way because it's not far. Like from Gothenburg, my hometown, up to Oslo, it's like 3 hours. And along that coast, which is the west coast, there's tons, probably thousands of routes just in this little area, And that's also probably the best area, I would say, in general. There are other places as well. But for the highest concentration of good rock climbing, that's the place to go. And that's what people call Bohuslän. That's kind of the name of the region.
Right. And you were born in Sweden?
Yes, so I was born in Gothenburg, which is the second largest city.
Because you don't look Swedish.
What does a
We'll
Swede...
get to that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always get to hear this, and maybe this was true 100 years ago.
Now it's a little more mixed up.
But if you look at what the world looks like these days, it's a mix. It's you can't really avoid this.
Right.
And so my father is from Morocco in North Africa, and my mother's from Finland. And these three countries, Morocco, Finland, and Sweden, they are completely different. Although Finland is a neighboring country to Sweden, it's completely different. It always, because not only is the language completely different, it doesn't have anything to do, because Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, they come from the Germanic language source.
Right.
So they have a lot of similarities. I can speak to a Norwegian, even a Danish person. But Finnish comes from somewhere else, because the Finnish people also came from more from Russia,
Right.
And it was always a little bit squeezed in between the big brother Russia and Sweden, so they have their own culture, you can say. And then obviously Morocco is really different in all ways, My father and mother, they met in Gothenburg, and that's where they decided to settle down. So I was born there and I was raised there also.
But you have a lot of connections still to Morocco and to that culture as well.
Yep.
So as you were growing up, were you in both places, or were you primarily in Sweden?
Yeah, we were primarily in Sweden, and we always spent the winters and the Christmas times and things like this, and summers in Finland.
Okay.
Mainly with my grandparents. So I have a very strong connection to Finland.
Okay.
Even stronger than Sweden.
Right.
In many ways, you know. And maybe not every year, because it wasn't possible for us at the time economically. We went to Morocco as much as possible. But since the last maybe 15 years, I go at least once to Morocco, because that's where I really feel that my second half has its roots, you know.
Okay.
And it's great because I speak Finnish fluently, also Arabic, and I speak 6 languages in total. But I think the language and the whole fact that my parents taught me these languages, it was always Arabic with my father, always Finnish with my mother. And I have so many friends with the same type of background who lost their language, and what ultimately happens is you lose this part of your culture a lot. Because for me to go to Finland and not speak the language with my grandparents doesn't make any sense. There's nothing there. Wouldn't have been anything there for me, you know. Same thing with Morocco. So that has been a really good way, and a way to sort of connect with these origins.
So you grew up in a house speaking on a daily basis Swedish, Arabic,
and Finnish. Yeah.
Just back and forth. Now, was this something that was? I'm kind of curious about this mix, because it's such. I mean, you said earlier, like, the world is becoming more and more like this, but it's still an interesting, you know, 3 corners of the world to come from, if you will. So was this by design with your parents wanting you to learn these things, or was it just sort of like, we hope that, or it just happened? Yeah,
I think it was both, but I think they took a really, because I think they knew a lot of other people who weren't that, they didn't really stick to this idea of keeping up with the language. Okay. And I think that was great. I mean, if I would answer my father in Swedish, he would just look at me like, what the hell are you saying, man? Like, are you kidding me? We speak Arabic.
Right.
And that was the thing that saved the whole thing. And and looking back at this today, I appreciate it. Like, it's one of my biggest gifts.
Well, certainly. I mean, and then you went on to obviously learn English, although that's, I think, it seems like most people I know of your generation and younger maybe even has come out of school with a really good English. And that's 4. What else you got?
And then French and Spanish, because I climbed so much in Spain and France, and you can't really be there without talking these languages. You lose, again, so much of the culture.
Right.
I mean, go there and try to speak English, you know, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's a little rough, especially in France. You know, and it's interesting because I think that the research has really shown that learning those 3, and probably English simultaneously in school, you know, probably really set your brain up to be this, like, sponge for languages.
Yeah, I mean, my brother is exactly the same. My bigger brother, he works with languages even. So, yeah, and it's not a problem to switch. I mean, the other day I was speaking French with Robin Erbesfield, and in the day I came into this gas station near Boulder, and this guy there just started talking with me in Spanish. He thought I was Mexican. I was a bit like, okay, here we go.
Friend.
Here we go.
He comes to Carbondale and he's like, Chris, I don't have to speak English here. I'm like, yeah, I know. You're good to go, dude.
Yeah. So and it's not a problem. I got a bit overwhelmed, and then in the evening we had dinner with Christian Griffith at this Mexican restaurant where we eat every night, and of course the chefs came in, and I tried to use some of my Mexican words, you know, but it's fun, you know. That's that's as I said earlier, it's such a gift that connects you to this person or this culture. It's like you don't have to take a big detour. You can go straight into the source.
So you're a little kid growing up in Sweden, all right? And I always want to get to this this moment, especially with talking with people from other countries, other cultures, but also other climbing cultures. So what happened to get you into climbing then?
So, I mean, it wasn't really that long ago. It was in the beginning of the 90s, but I kind of have an old school way how I started, and like all other kids, I was climbing on everything, trees and buildings and whatever. But most kids stop at a certain age, when they think they're so mature that they can't do this anymore, and they start doing whatever they do. But I was kind of slow, I suppose, so I just kept on climbing. And I climbed the highest tree in school. I climbed in through the window of the classroom, and I did all these things. And finally, I got to a point where I couldn't really see how to take my climbing to the what you use here, this expression, to the next level. And then it was kind of a combination. I saw this program about rock climbing on TV. It was just a really short thing, and it just clicked. Like, what is that? With all the gear. I mean, I was still a kid. Just the gear and the ropes and everything just looked amazing, And also on the opposite side from where I grew up, this is just outside Göteborg, in a little place called Mölndal. There's like a huge, very obvious rock formation that's called Rallaberget. And I think, like in all countries where you have the mountains really close, that's where climbing started off really early, because it's there, it's so obvious. And people, they were always drawn to the mystery of the mountain, or just, And the same thing was here with this Rallaberget. I just wanted to go there and see what it was. Just get up on top and see for myself, like an adventure, like a discovery. And because I didn't know anybody who was a climber, I didn't know what climbing really was, but I was just so drawn to this thing. Really hard to explain what it was. And of course, it started really slow, because if you wanted to do a climbing course, which was the natural thing to do at the time, I was too young. There was one really lousy climbing wall at the time. I was too young to climb there, so I had to do it myself. There was no internet.
So how old were you about? Like, we're talking a little...
Like 10 years.
Little teeny dude.
Yeah, really. And I'm still small, right. So just imagine. So, I went to the library and got the only book about rock climbing, and that book was quite dated even. That was from the early 80s, like really old school techniques. I didn't have money to buy all this gear that you needed, so I had to make it myself. So first of all, I made a harness from a seat belt from a car that we found in Finland. And the rope, we got it from some friends who were into boats. So this was a really thin, static rope. And also the carabiners, I put together everything that I found. And at this time, it was trad climbing that was the thing to do. I mean, sport climbing. In this book, there was nothing. Well, maybe there was a picture of a bolt, but it was all trad. So I went to the climbing shop, and the cheapest nuts were the smallest ones. So my first set was all these small nuts, these small eccentrics.
Right.
And you can just imagine the type of climbs I would do at the time. There were huge cracks and things like that. You couldn't really fit any of those nuts anywhere. And we were just, it was an adventure. It was always, we went just out to this rock, and it was always like on-site, first descent, complete adventure.
So when you say we, who had you recruited into the fold?
Anybody. Anyone. My brother, but he was too scared. Friends from my class.
Smart.
Yeah, probably. yeah, because he realized that shit. This is too dangerous. He was a bit older than me, so he had better. I would just take friends from school, and of course there were some accidents. And after one accident, that kid, he never came back. This friend of mine, because their parents told them, you can't go out with this maniac, and climb. So after a while, there were not so many friends left who wanted to come along. So it was a very adventurous time, and in one way, I look at this period like, shit, I wished it was more like today. Because I had so much will to climb, and that there was more like a forum where I could express this thing, maybe start in a climbing gym or whatever. But it was a really slow start. But at the same time, this really shaped me as a climber, because nobody told me what climbing was supposed to be. There was nothing about grades, or you should dress like this, or it was my own way of discovering rock climbing, and it was an adventure. And I think this thing, people always ask me, do you still climb? Well, of course, do you still eat? Do you still sleep? It's such a natural thing to do. And I think maybe it's good to have a start like this, to really find your place and to know what climbing is for you. Nobody's telling you what it should be or what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, things evolved. There was a new climbing club in town, so I did my climbing course, which was one of the best weekends in my life. I got to meet real climbers and use all the gear. It was incredible, you know. I was like in a complete trance that whole weekend, basically. And also I started to sneak into the climbing gym, and they threw me out. And I would come back, and I would kind of knew which people knew me, and sometimes I would get in, sometimes they would throw me out. And finally they gave up because, you know, we have these long winters in Sweden.
Yeah.
And I was training in the gymnastics that we have in school, this big hall. And I would sometimes leave the window open after finishing the class and get back and rappel down from the roof top in through this window that I left open, and then go in and train there on ropes and all types of things. I was desperate, you know. And at this climbing gym, finally they were like, okay, shit, we can't get rid of this guy.
So wait, I want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So this, like, after the school's closed, you're like, I'm going to keep training, and you'd rappel in through the window, and then...
Yeah, that I left open.
Right, okay.
So I would be, and,
Right.
and I'm sure if you go back into that place today,
Right.
you'd still see the old chalk marks way up in the ceiling. And I was leading up, putting Prusik knots on the ropes, getting up there, we were leading, someone would follow, you know.
Okay, across the beams and...
Exactly,
and
this
right,
type of thing.
Right.
You get to the Roman rings, you'd make a hanging belay there, you know. Just, you know, that was just the way it was.
Right.
And anyway, we did this for a while, but, you know, I wanted to climb. This was not really real climbing. So we got into the gym, and finally the managers gave up, and they gave me like they found a guy to sort of to look after me, you know. And it was this guy, Jens Larsen, who has maybe one of the biggest climbing sites for climbing today, which is 88.nu.
Okay.
So we met back this is in 94. And also that summer I was in, my father is a doctor in environmental economics, so we always, some summers we were in Austria, some summers in France, and in the summer of 94 we went to France, to this little village called Montbonneau. It's just between Grenoble and Kroll, where Petzel is, actually. And, you know, I had saved up all this money to buy my first real nice set of nuts and some nice carabiners and things like this. And I'd been climbing around Gothenburg, you know, setting up top ropes or leading these really scary things, but I had really bad gear. And I bought all this gear finally in France, and we get up to this crag, and it's covered with bolts. And I had never seen that before, because it was just when sport climbing had started to take off. Yeah, to take off in Sweden, you know. And we will get to this later, but there was a big controversy about bolts in Sweden at that time, and it's still a huge issue and a huge debate even today, like 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized in France, like, shit, I can climb 5 times as much as I could back home with all the trad gear, you know, just climbing, you know, clipped bolts.
Right.
So that was also a really big moment a big thing that happened in my climbing life, discovering sport climbing, because I was a traditional climber that's how it all started. But I realized that, okay, for me the most important thing is maybe the actual climbing aspect. The adventure will always be very important, but this is probably why I do mostly sport climbing, even to this day, although I like all the other disciplines with climbing big walls or trad or bouldering or competition or ice climbing or whatever it is. I think for the pure climbing experience for me, this ever since 94, this has been the main driving force, you know. Because I want to climb as much as possible, you know.
So you come home back to Sweden, which the way you're describing it, you know, is kind of the way I would imagine in terms of the ethics in a place like that. You've got granite, I don't know, for whatever reason tends to lend itself not so much for bolts, more for trad climbing.
Yep.
And a lot of times when, you know, you've got these places, I think, like, that are not necessarily centers of the tradition, more maybe an outlying community, it seems like those kind of controversies tend to be a little hotter out in those places to me.
Really hot.
Right.
It's still burning hot.
Right.
And I met Jens there, and he was right in the middle of the debate, and he still is.
Right.
He's one of the biggest driving forces to try to, because we have rules about what you can bolt and what you can't bolt. This is not gritstone,
Right.
The gritstone, no bolts. That's
Right.
it. But that's not how it's supposed to be done in Sweden. But anyways, I met him, and I got right in the middle, just like this, threw him into the scene that was going on in Gothenburg. And it was also the competition scene that had just started to get really popular. And as I had played soccer, as you call it here, before, for me it was quite a natural thing to do. I was like, okay, competition, why not? As I told you earlier on, we have these long winters. Training indoors was a great way to just have something to do, and after a while we also started to go to the national competitions. It was a good way to connect with the rest of the scene in Sweden. And around this time, because like that summer of '94, it was still my father who came out to belay me, and he was scared. I mean, you can't believe. I mean, he's got what do you call it, vertige?
Vertigo?
When you're afraid of heights.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was so nervous. Like the summer of '95, we went to Bukes together, and I was like, okay, this has to be the last trip we do, because how climbing is. Your company is maybe the most important thing to encourage you, to make you feel relaxed, and to make you feel good. He was so scared, all the time. So I mean, that was kind of one of the last times he came out to watch me climbing, to be honest.
Okay.
And this is 20 years ago. But anyways, I got into the climbing scene in Gothenburg with Jens and all these other people, and started to do competitions. And in the summer of, or actually the autumn of '95, we went to one of the first youth world championships. This was in Laval in France. And same thing there, like this climbing course weekend. It was a complete trance to meet all these youngsters from all over the world. And what's funny now is, I mean, if you look at the list of who was there and who won, etc., it was Chris Sharma, Katie Brown, a lot of other American people and North American people who still climb. There were a lot of the French people who became my good friends, like Tony Lamiche, Sylvain Millet, Liv Sanso, Muriel Sarkani. There were a lot of, they were already there at that time, I didn't really get to know them then, but it's so nice to look back and see that most of these climbers still climb, in one way or another. Maybe not so much competition anymore, but... So that was really, really inspiring to see. Although it was competition, it was the first time for me to see a little bit what other people in my age were doing around the world, and it was really cool because if you look at the North American athletes, everybody had these huge verve pants, big necklaces, dyed hair. The scene of Rifle with Timmy Fairfield and Kevin Bradford and all these guys who were kind of in the... So I got a bit of this taste of the North American climbing culture, which was great, because I think there's a big connection between Scandinavia and North America in terms of taste, both clothing and food and a lot of things, So I had a lot more in common with them, also with the language, of course. And after that, I actually did 10 years of competition for the national team. So from '95 to 2005, I was quite active.
And so is Sweden like a lot of these European countries that have a funded team? Was this something you could sort of do and fund your life through, or were you also working and doing a lot of other things to get by? Tunnel somewhere? I mean, how are you making that all happen?
Yeah, it was, I mean, the Climbing Federation had and still have quite a lot of money, and it was supposed to go to the competition scene. But that's in theory, but in reality that was not the case. So, it was, we would arrive in Germany with a busload of youngsters. We would sleep in a park. On the ferry from Sweden to Germany, some guys would sleep under a stair or something like this. It was super low budget, just to be able to do it. And Jens he did his best, to keep the whole thing going, because he was the coach of the first junior national team. So it was, and still up to this day, there's a lot of money, but I don't see that money going to the competitors. So the competition scene, I realized this is not the way to go for me in climbing, and outdoor climbing was always the main thing. But as I was stuck in school, the long winters again, training, well, what the hell, why not do competition,
Right.
But so I did that for those years, but as soon as I finished high school, I knew where to go. And at that time it was Aix-en-Provence in south of France. That was the mecca for sport climbing at the time. So as soon as I finished, my mother actually sponsored that first trip because my contracts weren't good enough. And I went there and I met up with François Legrand, and we became really good friends and had like a year there almost climbing with him mainly, and met a lot of other people. But if I look at it now, it was the only way to evolve in my climbing, because the community in Sweden is, I'm not going to go in detail too much about it to say something negative, but I never really felt at home there, and I still don't, and that's why I've been traveling so much. And to doing that big step to get out of that bubble, and just go what you would call international, that was, if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Okay.
That was like a really, really important maneuver that I did back then.
Were you also creating some sort of, you said you were in school, was there ever any sort of thought of an alternative path? Was there something your parents wanted you to do?
Are you kidding me, man?
I was just curious.
Yeah, of course.
What we call here in the States, did you have a backup plan?
I never had a backup plan, but my parents,
they had a backup plan.
Man, it's been a struggle for all these years, because as I told you, my father is afraid of heights. Of course, he didn't want his son to become a professional rock climber.
Sure.
And also he didn't think that was even possible.
Right.
Nobody did.
It barely is. So.
And it barely is.
Yeah.
But if I look at it now, I only worked for 2 months in my entire life,
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, high five. That's awesome.
So I kind of tried that and said, no, this is not for me.
Okay.
And I always just wanted to climb.
What were you doing for those 2 months?
I was
laying bricks.
Yeah, I was assisting this guy who had a handicap.
Okay.
It was a super easy job to get.
Sure.
Because in Sweden you can get a job tomorrow if you go there.
Right.
It's not a place where people are just lazy who don't want to work, actually, to be honest. But anyways, so I tried that, and that kind of funded one of my first big trips to Spain and Morocco.
Okay. Cool.
And when I got back from that, I signed up with a clothing company called it just started to become a clothing company called Salomon. It's a French company, They had their new line of clothes, and they wanted some climbers, and I had a little bit money before that, but that's kind of where I went more independent.
Right.
And this was Salomon Sweden only. It was not yet the international. That also almost happened, but then they changed course and left climbing and clothing altogether.
Okay.
But that's a different chapter.
Right. So you're out there now. You're an outdoor climber, and you're being, you say you have these contracts or anything else, but we're talking about a pretty dirtbag existence.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think because what kind of year are we talking about? Late 90s at this point?
Yeah, I finished high school in 2000.
Right. Okay, so right around then.
Yeah.
But, and even in the last decade, things have changed so much. And when I made that joke of it really isn't possible to be a professional climber, even a decade ago, it was that much harder. And, I just always think about when I think about someone like François Legrand, that era, the French guys probably had some pretty good state backing, in terms of, because that's really strong in France,
Yep.
And you tend to see all these great glamorous photos of them climbing, but certainly in between time, they weren't living the high life, and you were right in there with them.
Yeah, François told me, I saw him just a few weeks ago, and he told me already then, it was much easier with sponsorship then, because there were less climbers,
Sure.
And there were some big deals to be done with Rolex,
Okay.
Jeep, with companies that you wouldn't even imagine today.
Okay.
So François had a pretty good situation, actually, but he was the big. There was only him.
Right.
He was the best climber in the world at the time. So of course for me it was really dirtbag, as you said, and it was hitching around south of France, with a bag of already cooked spaghetti in one hand, you know, putting the thumb out. And you get to the crag and you sleep there, you know, just in a cave or something. Did this one trip or several trips with this friend of mine, Cody Roth.
Oh yeah.
Who's from Burke, from Albuquerque.
Yeah. Cody's been on the show.
Okay, great.
I went to Colombia with Cody a couple of years ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, super guy. And you know, I visited him in Burke. He came and visited me in Sweden, and he did the Nordic Championships in bouldering with me there. We had a great time, but it was the dirtbag lifestyle. But again, you know, when I look back at this, I don't have to do it anymore.
Right.
But it was a great thing to do and to have experienced, because you appreciate everything so much more. And climbing was really the hard way, man.
Right.
My parents, you know, they didn't really want me to climb. They never really supported me in climbing, and nobody else did. And there was always someone also in the climbing community telling me how I was doing everything wrong.
Sure.
You know, when I started, I climbed like a madman, really fast, didn't use my feet, the typical Chris Sharma. So when I read that article about him winning the North American Championships by campusing to the top, I was like, wow, there's someone else in the world who climbs like me. Because in Sweden, everybody tried to climb like François Legrand or Antoine Le Ménestrel, in total control, you know.
You must push with your feet.
Yeah, it was all about that. And maybe that was good for vertical routes, but climbing was changing, you know. It was getting steeper and more powerful, and you had to climb faster. So there was, like, from the first day when I walked in there into the climbing community back in '94, people said, this guy, he's too much, you know. And it's been hard, you know. Everybody, and up to this day in Sweden, I mean, it's not a place where you go and get inspired, unfortunately.
Right.
So it was always about going your own way and doing what you follow your heart, basically. Even if that sounds cliche, it was definitely the truth, because there was no support from nowhere, except my sponsors, fortunately. So I really have them to thank. And a few people that I've met along the way that I've connected with, and most of these people are still some of my best friends today, who really, and today, as you see how climbing is changing, you know, it's going in a direction that I'm not maybe so interested in, you know. It's becoming so much more about climbing being a sport with grades and competitions. I think there's another aspect of climbing that's way beyond that, you know, and that's why I still climb today, you know, because I think I would have stopped otherwise. It would have been too tough to always go against the stream, you know, and doing what everybody taught you not to do. So,
right. Well, let me I wanted to kind of ask you a couple things that might be connected to what you just said. We had a conversation a few days ago when we met, and we were just talking all about these things with your the gree and the not the belay device, but the what is like an amulet. Yeah. And so you have this connection to some of these, you know, and that's a North African thing, and what came across in this conversation, without going into a ton of detail, though we can, but is that you have this part of you that is driven by some of these, maybe I would go as far as say sort of mystical aspects of the world, you know, which implies that you're a person of kind of deep thought, or you want that out of life. I mean, because you seek those things out, you know, maybe some of them came from your culture, but, you know, in a modern age, it'd be very easy to dismiss some of these mystical things. So can you talk a little bit about your climbing and your connection to climbing at all, in terms of that? Like, you know, you've talked about your style and about being this driven little kid, and you've hinted at why, or that it's something that you need as much as you need food and water and sleep and things. So why do you think that is? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, as I said, I'm quite old school. That's why I hang out with people like Christian Griffith, you know, and a lot of other old timers, Alan Carn, you know, or Zippy or whoever. Because if you look at society today and even climbing, it's, you know, when climbing started, like here in North America or everywhere, those people were trying to leave the modern society behind, you know. They wanted to take acid and get up on El Cap, and just leave everything behind. And today, climbing is just becoming as much as square as a society, I think. It's becoming boring, the way I look at it. I'm not saying it's all boring, but it's so much a sport. But as I said, I think there's so much more about climbing than that. And in climbing, I've found, there are many ways to approach, because I don't think the world is as simple as it looks. There is another parallel dimension, and we're not going to talk about religion or spirituality so much here, and I've sensed that since I was really, really young. And when you climb, that's all you do. You leave everything behind, because in our Western world, you have to be so smart, you have to think. It's so much in the mind all the time, And that's kind of what makes people successful. It's not going out, being completely savage, stripping your shirt off and just moving on a rock screaming. That's not what people do usually. But for me, that was always a way to be able to express myself. And I always felt really, really natural. And being myself, moving on rock, that was me. There was nothing. I didn't have to be anything else. I didn't need to be smart, which of course helps sometimes in climbing. But I was always driven by a natural just instinct. And that's why I climbed like I did. I didn't care about someone telling me, no, you should work more with your feet. This is the way I climb. Mm-hmm. This is my way to express myself. And when I climb like this, and especially in hard routes, sometimes when you really push yourself, you get into this state of mind where you just leave everything. And you don't even remember how you did the moves. You don't know anything. And you can't find this state of mind in the everyday life. It's impossible. Maybe some very deep meditation, or there are some people use drugs. There are ways to approach this really, clear state of mind, where all the thoughts and all the things just disappear and everything becomes clear. And you can do it in many ways in climbing, but that's why I think, just going out and move on rock for me is the most important thing in climbing. It doesn't have to be hard necessarily. Of course, that can take you to the next level, but this way of just leaving everything behind and being up there on your own. And that's why I also like going bouldering on my own. It's just me and the rock. There's nothing else there. Or even if I climb a route, I just disappear up into... Because climbing it's an inner journey more than anything, I think. The physical thing is one thing, but what you experience and where your mind goes, it's so far beyond just this. Even today in rifle, some routes are great, but some of them, it's maybe not the most beautiful. There is some manufactured stuff, and today it was raining. But when I was climbing this route, I went beyond rifle and everything, just really far out. And this starts to start a bit, I don't know what you call it here, but a bit out there, what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But this is what climbing is for me, and it has always been. And I hope it will always be like this, because it's like a moving meditation, And some people say it's not, but for me it definitely is, because you concentrate on one thing and you disappear in your mind, and it's very rare that I'm that focused in anything else in life. And I guess that's why it's so addictive also. You just have to do it, like every day. You want to be there, And as I said, it doesn't have to be something hard or, dangerous, but just to go up there and move on the rock and being in that element. I don't know if this made any sense whatsoever, but
of course it did. No, it really did, because there was, while you were talking, some of our other conversations from earlier started to also make kind of some sense. And I wanted to talk about your music, mm-hmm. And I just hinted at some of the things we were just gabbing about, and you were talking about again some of the kind of connections you have to these rituals from your Moroccan side. And as I just said, you seek those things out in a modern age. You weren't born in a tent in the desert in Morocco, so you had to go find them. So mm-hmm. Do you think some of those things are the same drive to find that beyond experience? Is that connected to any of that?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at music, I mean, you can play music just for fun, like this, like we do here in this part of the world. It's entertainment most of the time for people to have a good time, maybe become a little bit nostalgic, maybe, you know, have a fling with someone on the dance floor or whatever, you know. It's very... But if you look at where music came from originally and how it's still played in quite a few places in the world, the music is just a tool to get you somewhere else, to this state of mind. And it's always used in a context that's much bigger than just the music. And as I said, it's not for entertainment. It doesn't have anything to do with that whatsoever. And for instance, in Morocco, we have this kind of a cult that's called Gnawa. And the music and a lot of the spiritual background came with the black Africans coming through the Sahara Desert. And you can find this cult, although it has different names and slightly different shapes, in all of North Africa. And it kind of mixed with Islam and became different therapeutic rituals, you know. People will go to, you know, if they had a problem with if they were obsessed with spirits, or if they had it could be all kinds of mental illnesses. I mean, today here, if you have this problem, you go to a doctor. And very often these doctors can't really help you out because it's not in their book. And you can find this in Morocco, you can find it in West Africa. If you look at voodoo in Haiti, or in Brazil, or in Cuba, you have the Santeria, you have the Candomblé, you have this thing, or even the shamanism in the north of Scandinavia with the Sami people. It's the same thing. Or, you know, in the rainforests of South America, or with the Native Americans here. People have been doing this always. And it's not something that someone just came up with just like that overnight. It was something that people needed. And I have a very big need of these things, you know. And that's why I go to Morocco to these rituals. I mean, it's not climbing, but it's a place where, again, I can express myself and I can go into a different state of mind. And I've seen some pretty scary things, how this thing expresses itself. You know, people cutting themselves with knives, burning themselves, you know, drinking boiling water, and just really out there things that, you know, if you would see someone doing that here, they would say, this guy's crazy. But there it's completely, I would say, normal, and it's there's a way for people to take care of a person like this. And it's not these rituals, it's not just something that happens, people having a jam and people, you know, freak out. It's very well organized. It's very strict. The music you play with the right color, the right spirit or saint, with the right incense. And there are a lot of people there taking care of people who fall into trance. Because I've fallen into trance in rave parties in Sweden, things like this. Because I'm a raver, to be honest, since I was 13, and I love techno and all these things. But what I realized there is that if you really get really deep, there's nobody there to help you. They don't even know how to take care of someone who is in this state of mind. And if someone is, you know, ODing on drugs, well, then you end up in a hospital. But that's not, you know, I've never drinking alcohol. I never tried any drugs. I don't drink coffee. I don't smoke. I don't do anything. It's another way of getting there, you know. And for me, it's been climbing or dancing or music. So that's why I try just to go to the places where people know what it's all about, you know, and who have a really long background of taking care of these things. So, yeah, that's just the Moroccan part, you know, how things happen there. I mean, we could have a podcast only about Gnawa music, you know, because it's so big.
But you play it.
And yeah, then I'm also a musician.
Right. And that the thing is that you're part of it on that end of things as well. Playing several different instruments, specifically the one with the G.
Gimbri.
The Gimbri.
Yeah.
Right. And you talked about how it's like again, it's not just jamming. You know, it's not just like, oh, what do you know? I know this. What do I? Although I suppose you could do that as well. But within these contexts, it's a pretty strict tradition of what you're playing that's tied to all these other things.
Yep.
When did you first like pick those instruments up? Was that something you knew at home, or was it some connection to your father's side of the family, or?
Yeah, it's been a strange path, you know. You know, this is really not something that's mainstream. Same thing how climbing was when I started. It was climbing. It was unheard of. It didn't exist. Same thing with the Gnawa music. And you know, these days there's a big Gnawa festival in Essaouira in Morocco, which is more a folkloric festival. It's not a ritual. You know, the Gnawa masters, they get up on stage and they've invited some really good jazz musicians from the States, you know, and some funk musicians from France, and they go up and jam, and there are 300,000 people there dancing around. And that's great. And a lot of people who go to this festival, if they come from abroad, they're like, wow, this gimbri is pretty cool. They buy themselves a gimbri, they go back home to France or Spain, they see on YouTube a little bit how you play, and that's it. But man, you missed the whole point. This instrument is a sacred instrument. It belongs to a huge tradition. But a lot of people approach things this way today. It's a lot about, you know, it's like a supermarket. You just go in there and take what you want and you leave. Same thing with spirituality, a lot of other things, you know. People don't take their time to go deeper inside. And I think the same thing is with climbing a lot of times. There is so much more to it than just jumping between big yellow blobs in a climbing gym, you know. So I heard this music in Morocco one summer, and it was just like straight into my heart, because before that I had experimented quite a lot with West African music. We have a big not big, but a strong West African community in Gothenburg who play a lot of percussion music like djembe and things like this. And as I came from the rave scene, that became interesting, you know. But it wasn't my music, you know, because there are a lot of music styles. I played all types of music from pretty much all 6 corners of the world, but it's not my music. Like I played the yidaki or the didgeridoo for many, many years in a really high level. And I went to the Arnhem Land in Australia to play. But I'm not an Aborigine, you know. I'm not from any tribe. Although I could become a skin brother and, you know, be adopted by some people, it's not from here. I don't have it in my genes. But with the Gnawa music, you know, I just heard this music and like, oh shit, I just lost my mind, you know. I don't know if you ever experienced this feeling of just getting overwhelmed. It's like a dream almost. So I had to look it up. Like, what the hell is this? How can this be so strong? And again, as it's really underground, it was very difficult to get into the scene, and especially if you're an outsider, you don't have any background, you don't know anything. I was still quite young at the time.
At least you spoke Arabic.
At least I spoke Arabic, and I was kind of dark-skinned, you know, and they said maybe this guy has some Gnawa, you know, somehow.
Right.
But it was a long journey, and especially I got back to Sweden, and there were no Gnawa musicians in Sweden. Nobody knew what it was. And I was out touring with my brother's band, which was a band that took off like in the beginning of 2000. That's called Kingston Air Force. We were on tour, and I was the percussionist for them, and I would dress up like a Gnawa musician, you know. And of course nobody knew what that was. But at one gig, there was this guy in the door. He just came up to me and said, Gnawa. Like, all right, so how do you know about this? He said, okay, my father's been playing Gnawa music since the 60s. So I got his father's number, and I called this man up the day after. And this man, his name is Christer Botén. He's one of the greatest jazz musicians to come out of Sweden. And he's one of the biggest musicians in what we call world music today. And he played a lot with one very famous improvisation trumpetist whose name is Don Cherry, the father of Nene Cherry and Eagle Eye Cherry. And he was right there with Ornette Coleman and all these great jazz musicians. But the names that I just said, they always took jazz in more to the world music thing. So he had been playing Gnawa music and also hunters music from southern Mali, from Wasolo. And I booked a ticket to Stockholm. I said, I just have to meet this man. And from that first day, we just clicked. Although he's, 40 years older than me? 40 years older than me. He became my mentor in music because I had studied classic violin for 10 years and played the violin. But that was my parents' choice. This was my choice. And with Christer, there was this spiritual connection. This was really the old school connection because he was an old school dude. He was playing in all those joints in New York back in the day, and it was just stories. He was in Mali when no other white people would go and play hunters music. No, anybody can do it. Same thing with Gnawa. So he was my first teacher in the Gimbri and also in the Donzongoni, which is the hunter's harp from Mali. And this is how I continued my musical life, was through Christer. But of course I have my own path, but he's still up to date, my mentor, and this is almost 15 years ago now.
Right. How old is he?
He just turned 74.
Okay.
But if I would call him now and you would talk to him, you would think that he's 15 or 20.
Oh, right.
Very young, and very, still doing his thing.
Mm-hmm. And so have you somehow integrated this climbing music thing together in terms of not just maybe on some sort of, again, mystical level, but just in terms of professionally? Like, is it something you can do traveling and as part of your part of your existence?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried a little bit, and depending on where I travel, maybe there are some musicians that could be interesting to meet. Like this trip, I hope we'll get a jam going with you someday. See if it happens. Who knows? But for instance, we do these big events with one of my main partners, Petzel, every year. That's called the Petzel Rock Trip, and that has been a great way to sort of combine climbing and music, because we always have these big parties. One of the guys, Laurent de la Fouchardière, La Fouche as he's called, he's also a musician and a DJ. So like for the first rock trip that I came to in 2004, that was the same thing. I hitched, I did everything to get there, and in the evening there was a gig and I just got on stage and I put some instruments together and we started playing, And that was in 2004. Now, last year in Turkey, I think we were like 4 or 5 or 6 musicians playing at every party that we had on the rock trip.
Okay.
And they were climbers. There was Sean Villanueva from Belgium, and there was all these guys, And it's so nice to be able to share that. We're climbers, but it's not only about, 2-finger pocket, and then you get to this crimp, but also about music. And I think a lot of times music can be a more relaxed atmosphere than climbing. Sometimes climbing make people a bit tense, even if it's not a competition,
Right.
Because they're so focused. But in the evening, you can just relax and play music and just connect in a different way. And that's what's great. If I go to Morocco, if I go there climbing, I go climbing all day, and in the evening it's going to be nice food and music, jam, and maybe even something more. But I think it's a great combination to be able to do, because you can't climb 24 hours a day anyway. And like other friends of mine, I've been jamming a bit with Chris Sharma, and Dave Graham is a lot into music. If I look at North American climbers, and actually one time I booked Chris for a few gigs in Sweden, and I said, okay, it's going to be too boring if you're just going to be up here talking about climbing and showing climbing videos. So in the end, it went into a jam. So I played the didgeridoo and he played the shukahachi flute, and we were screening all these photos, and after a while I put some techno backing tracks on, and it sounds maybe not like something amazing, but it was pretty cool because people didn't expect that.
Sure, I had no idea.
And people were like, shit, does he play,
Right.
And wow, what's going on?
Yeah, totally.
So that was all these little things. It's a fun way, because in the same way as climbing, I come to North America. If I didn't have climbing, if I didn't have music, how could I connect with you here?
Right.
I would never meet you otherwise.
No.
If it wasn't through these things, probably
not.
Unfortunately. But so climbing in music, it's like
Yeah.
how do you say, a way in,
Right.
in many ways.
Right.
And that's why, it's nice to travel with an instrument also. Like, I have this story. I was in Moab. I was busking in the streets playing the didgeridoo, and this dude just came up from nowhere, and we became really good friends. It was a great interaction, he was also a musician. Same with climbing. You travel, you meet people, and sometimes you make friends for life.
Right.
This is amazing, I think.
Well, I think it's also, when you were just saying that, it's a pretty open, accepting community, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Although within it, there are these traditions that can butt heads, with climbing and with music. And it's actually kind of along the same lines, like traditionalists versus people who want to change things. Maybe all pursuits have this, but you've got climbing, that the old way and the new way, and they don't always get along. And I just thought of like bluegrass, and there's some people who, there's only one way to play bluegrass, and if you throw a jazz scale in on, you're done, you're out, you don't beat it,
Yeah.
But at the same time, in general, over time, it's a commonality and a kind of an accepting group. I was just heard an interview with he was an old player from the South, like back in Muscle Shoals down in Alabama, like in the 70s. Spooner Oldham, his name is, and he was a session musician down in this studio in Alabama where like Wilson Pickett and Aretha Franklin would come down there. But all these guys, all the studio guys were white, and all these black musicians would come down because they wanted to get this sound that was coming out of the studio, Muscle Shoals. And it was like the only place, not only in that town, but practically in Alabama at the time, where it was just like, we're actually talking late 60s, where black folks and white folks could just hang out on equal footing.
That's
and like they would do this in the studio, and then the artists would have to go to segregated hotels and whatnot. So I feel like maybe there is this kind of grand acceptance based on, well, can you play? Well, yeah, I can play. Or can you climb? Yeah, I can climb.
Yeah, it's a universal language,
Yeah, certainly. So where are you at right now? I mean, what's on the plate? Where are you sitting with your music and with climbing currently?
Yeah, so I think just a little bit to finish what everything's connected here in one way or another. I mean, climbing for me and this whole life, it's just a journey, about discovering things. And I mean, people think that they know everything or trying to understand, but the more I travel, the more people I meet, it's like I don't know anything about anything. So you just try to stay curious and humble, and just try to go somewhere and see for yourself what's going on. And that's same for climbing as music. And if you look at what I've done in climbing, there's not like, wow, he's done this and that, but if you look at where I've gone and a little bit more about the volume, that says pretty much about me as a climber. I've traveled to more than 40 countries to climb. I don't know how many hundreds of climbing areas, and climbed around 1,500 routes between the 8th and 9th grade. This is a French grading, So I'm not really looking for being, everybody's like, yeah, I have to do the hardest thing, and I have to do this and be the best. For me, it's just about the discovery, And right now we're on our way to Smith Rock, where I haven't been yet. And of course, I have an idea of, okay, I want to do it. It's such a mythical route, and looks like such a beautiful line. But I think it's more important to go there to just be curious and just see what's there. I mean, maybe I see a different line. That's great. I mean, a lot of people, when they go to a new area, they already have their scorecard ready. Man, how is that possible? You haven't even been to the place. Does this route even look good? Is it even good? But that's how things are. They want to do their first 13A or 13B, or it's very easy to get drawn into this way of thinking. But so we're just on a journey, and kind of see what happens. And if we find something that's inspiring, I'll try to do it, And that's been always my driving force in climbing. It's about the journey. The goal usually comes by itself, and people always ask me, you don't feel a lot of pressure from your sponsors? There are a lot of amazing young climbers coming up today. I said, that's never been my bag, you know.
Right.
That's never been me. I've never been the best climber. I never wanted to be. That was not my intention ever. It was just to climb, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do this the way I do it. And that's still the thing. And there's no expiry date for a climber. I think if you look at hard routes, I still think my hardest routes are in the future, always. Because climbing is for life. I mean, I have a lot of friends, they're in their 40s, their 50s. They still climb better than ever. Mm-hmm. There's no stress. At the same time, I said earlier that I'm not maybe the most smart climber. If I want to do my really hardest routes, maybe I shouldn't wait until I'm 60. It's probably a good idea to try to start to think about that a little bit now, you know. But just in general, like how time passes for me in climbing, is just go out and climb and travel and see what's out there, you know. And a lot of places I go back, some places I never return. This is probably my 4th time in Rifle, and I was here in 99 the first time, and every time I leave I say, okay, this is a place to return to. There's a very unique style of climbing. There's a kind of a unique community here that you can't find it anywhere else, and that's the way things go. And same thing with music, you know, just travel. And again, it's a universal language. It's a great way to travel and see places and meet people. Like I was in China climbing, and I wanted to study this Chinese violin, 2-string violin called the erhu. And I don't speak Mandarin or anything. But somehow I found this teacher, and I mean, he didn't speak in English or any of my languages. But it was just so great. We would hang out the whole day, play, laugh, and just, you know, and we didn't speak one single word of each other's language. That just blows your mind. Mm-hmm. Because there are other ways of connecting. Mm-hmm. And the more you do this, the more you realize that it's how do you say? It's eternal. And I think that's the same thing with life, you know. It's not going to end here.
Right.
There's a big energy force that's started somewhere, it's going somewhere, and we're part of that. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't end here. So I know this sounds, again, very cliche, but, you know, if you want to look at life and climbing and all these things in a bigger perspective, it's true in a way. And I hope I can stay connected to this philosophy, you know, for as long as possible.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for sitting down. I need to get some food in you. You climbed all day and then in the rain and the cold and came straight here. I totally appreciate that. It's been great talking to you. Really interesting and inspiring to hear your story.
Thanks to me. It's an honor to be here.
Right on.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Saeed, the man, Belhaj, for coming on the show. Super fun to sit down with the guy. I look forward to running into him somewhere in the world in the future. Hey, folks, if you want to help out the Enormocast, you can. A bunch of different ways. Supporting our sponsors. Buy some belay specs. Enter Enormocast at checkout, belayspecs.com. Check out Peter Gilroy's jewelry at peterwgilroy.com. Enter Enormo at checkout for a discount. Or just head over to the website, enormocast.com. Click on the sponsor page. That's all there. Click on the help out page. That's all there. Yeah, gotta lift a finger, but shouldn't be too hard. I do appreciate the support. Maybe I'll see you on your ray. Don't forget to check your knot.
Feel pretty good. I'm not scared at all. I just feel kind of invincible.
Me too. I got a very positive attitude about this.
Good, me too.
Yeah.
Is it getting hot in here, or is it just me?